Elsa, why do you not talk to me?
Hello and welcome to another bad movie review. This time we're looking at The Terror. This is a 1963 film, runs about an hour and 19 minutes. The only rating I could find was the TV rating, which was PG, and that seems about right. This was directed by several people. Roger Corman gets the credit for it most of the time, but he really only shot a few days of this, which was primarily the Boris Karloff scenes and a few pickup shots later on apparently. It looks like Francis Ford Coppola did a lot of the outdoor scenes months later, as well as Dennis Jakob, Monte Hellman, Jack Hale, and maybe Jack Nicholson. That's a little unclear. There's apparently some dispute on that, but a lot of that was exterior shots. This was the first film where Jack Nicholson appeared in a movie with his wife's at the time, Sandra Knight. So we start off the year as around 1806. There's an old man in a creepy castle walking around, and he goes through this portcullis, and there's a secret panel, and he goes down and there's a spooky dead body that doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything, because then we get the opening and we cut over to Lieutenant Andre Duvalier, who is played by Jack Nicholson, best known for his movies like The Crybaby Killers and Mars Attacks. I don't know what other movies he may have been in. Well, Andre gets separated from his troops. It's alluded to that he may have fled, but he may also just have been separated. I didn't really pick up either way what was going on, but he ends up walking along the coastline with his horsey, and he sees a beautiful woman, and she ends up kind of disappearing on him, and he almost drowns in the surf. See, she went into the water and he was going after her, and he ends up succumbing to the waves, but he wakes up in a small cottage where a woman named Katerina tells him there was no girl. Now, Katerina and Gustav are the people that live in this building, kind of not officially. We find out a lot more about that later on. Now, he claims this woman that he saw, Helene, was real, but then we find out from this old lady that Helene is the name of her bird. They get a lot of mileage out of footage of that bird, and she says to forget about it, but things are not quite as they seem, and there's some shenanigans going on. Now, Andre stays there for a little while, but eventually keeps seeing the woman and knows something funny's going on, so he starts heading out to this castle, which is owned by Baron Victor Frederick von Lepp, which is Boris Karloff's character. He gets up there. On his way up there, and of course he saw the woman again, so he goes to follow her, and one of the worst fears that any kid that grew up in the 70s or 80s would experience happens, where he almost falls in quicksand, which we all thought was going to be a reoccurring theme in our lives, probably because of movies like this from the 60s. We all saw them on TV, plus Scooby-Doo episodes, that sort of thing, but it was no surprise that there was quicksand there. Even though they appear to be in France or Germany, quicksand must be a very common thing in this mountainous region. But he is saved by Gustav, and that leads him, of course, to the Lepp estate, which is this cool looking castle. But things don't get any less weird when he gets to the castle. We find out some secrets there, and the castle is only occupied by the Baron and his manservant Stefan, played by Dick Miller, who we saw in Bucket of Blood, and was also in Chopping Mall. This is probably his best role. He actually can act, and he does a pretty good job in this film. Now, Jack Nicholson is very young in this, and his acting is a bit unrefined at times, but he's still doing what he can with what he has to work with. Now, there are a lot of secrets around what's going on here, and it does seem a bit disjointed through parts of the film. It's a little unclear what the old lady's powers are, because she's obviously got some kind of supernatural powers that seem to range from mesmerism to spontaneous combustion. But it turns out that's actually due to some problems with constantly rewriting the script. It seems Boris Karloff's scenes were all filmed in 2 days, and the second day was mostly the water fight scene, and even some of that was done later on, which if you look real closely, you can see some of these big blocks that are supposed to be parts of the building just floating in the water. So apparently the building was made out of styrofoam. And I don't want to give too much away because it's actually a pretty interesting movie. even if it is a little disjointed and there's some clear script problems. Like, you're not really sure what Helene is. Is she a ghost of somebody else, or is she some sort of summoned spirit? That is really, really unclear, but it's sort of kind of explained, but not really well. And the big twist is revealed not through dialogue between Boris Karloff's character and Andre. It's actually done through Stefan and Andre, and it's a twist you probably won't see coming because I don't think anybody on set knew it was coming either. So this movie is largely disjointed, not just because they did a lot of script revisions, but because there were also some urgency to the matter. A lot of the outside scenes were filmed way later on, and a lot of the scenes with Stefan and Andre were filmed later on too, and you could tell because Dick Miller's hair length and sideburns changed size throughout the movie, which is a really fun game to play, see how many times his hair changes from scene to scene. But also because with Boris Karloff's scenes having been filmed so early on in the first 2 days, when they rework parts of the script, they have to do it through the other characters and their dialogue. And again, they revised it several times, so even some of that is a little disconnected and disjointed. Still, it's a very atmospheric movie. They were trying to make use, like Roger Corman always does, of sets that are there so that he could get the most bang for the buck and get multiple movies made using sets from other projects. And this is no exception. The sets are largely from The Raven and a few from Haunted Palace. And you can tell that because the tree that one of the characters dies against at the end of the film is actually the tree that Vincent Price's character suffers at in Haunted Palace. So the sets look beautiful and amazing, and they were obviously trying to get as much interior shots before those sets were torn down that they could and make the most of it. But there's a couple of storylines that are never resolved, like the baby bassinet is never really resolved, and why the big twist reveal is the way it is. And I don't want to give the twist away because it's actually a fairly important part of the story at the very end. But why did he believe what he believed? Was it madness or something else? And why did Stefan hang around? So while parts of it don't make a whole lot of sense, it's a weirdly fun film. There's some overacting in parts and some underacting in parts, and I think it really kind of comes together to make this weirdly charming, bizarre little horror film. I only counted 3 deaths, even though there is a 4th death, but that person was technically already dead, even though we saw their corpse in one location and suddenly at the end they're in a different location. That's neither here nor there. I didn't count that one because technically that's an undead and they'd already died before the movie started. But overall, I don't know how to really explain this movie because it is such a bizarrely shot one. I put off watching this for years because every time I tried to watch it beforehand, it was always just kind of slow going in the beginning and I just lost interest. So it does take a little bit to get going, but after about 10 minutes, it really does pick up. And it's definitely not going to be for everyone. It does have that kind of gothic feel to it, like it's an Edgar Allan Poe movie, but it does also kind of come off as a knockoff Poe movie. And because it was filmed during Roger Corman's Poe phase, which were actually fairly popular movies, like The Raven, it's going to have kind of that feel, but it's not an actual Poe film. And Jack Nicholson was in The Raven, so he wasn't just making use of the sets, he was making use of the crew and actors as well. And it really shows. Different scenes are obviously filmed in different styles, and that comes from having other people do a lot of the B-roll and secondary shots that don't involve Boris Karloff. But overall, it's a beautifully filmed movie. It's just very disjointed, much like this review, and a little weird. And I think that really works in its favor. So I'm absolutely going to recommend this. It's a fun, cheesy B movie that gets kind of a bad rap because it's really just a fun drive-in kind of movie. So if you're looking for a good B movie with a gothic feel that feels like a knockoff Edgar Allan Poe film, then this is probably going to be for you. Just ignore some of the plot problems and sit it out and enjoy the ride because it's definitely a fun film. They don't don't really make fun movies like this anymore, and you probably couldn't make this today at a major studio. So a strong recommendation on the cheese front. This is not going to be a cinema classic or anything, but it definitely has a lot of fun to it, even though it's got a low body count and a plot that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In the end, you get to see Boris Karloff on screen with Jack Nicholson and Dick Miller, so that kind of makes it worthwhile right there. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one.